Thank you everyone for joining us tonight for WiTT's panel discussion, The Impact of COVID-19 on Tech Development and Adoption. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Audrey Mandela. I'm the chair of Women in Telecoms and Technology, and we have two other WiTT directors on with us tonight, Yasmin Majid and Helen Koliski. So some housekeeping, first of all, this session is being recorded so that we can share it on the WiTT YouTube channel. We're not running this as a webinar because we'd like to encourage interaction, as some of you have seen earlier, and also later. But right now, I'd like to ask that everyone who is not a speaker, please turn off your microphones and video. Once the speakers finish their talks and we move into the Q&A and networking, you're welcome to turn them on again, and we'll have a more interactive session. If you have questions as we go along, please put them in the chat, and I'll call on you to allow you to ask your question yourself, unless you'd rather I read it out and just say. So the panel and Q&A will run roughly until 7:15. We'll then stay on, those of you who would like to, until 7:30 to network, and then we will close bang on 7:30. So let's get started. In March of 2020, just a few weeks into the first lockdown of several, McKinsey published an article that said, recent data show that we have vaulted 5 years forward in consumer and business digital adoption in a matter of around 8 weeks. Banks have transitioned to remote sales and service teams. Grocery stores have shifted to online ordering and delivery. Schools in many locales have pivoted to 100% online learning and digital classrooms. The New York Times reported that the NHS had seen a decade of technological change in the course of a week. Fortune wrote, the pandemic has only accelerated the head-spinning pace of technological change. And The Economist called it tech-acceleration. I think most of us would agree that there is very little doubt that COVID-19 has had a profound impact on tech innovation, development, and adoption among businesses, consumers, and the medical community. But as we begin to come out of lockdown here in the UK, which of these technologies and trends are here to stay, and which are likely to fall by the wayside? And which services, applications, and devices failed to gain traction despite high expectations? We're going to explore these questions from 4 perspectives tonight: the enterprise, retail and e-commerce, health, and consumer. And we have 4 fantastic speakers who are going to share their expertise and their insights with you. They are Camille Mendler, Chief Analyst, Enterprise Services, Service Provider and Communications, Omdia, who will talk about the enterprise, Melissa Bane, Managing Director Europe for Grail Insights, who will talk about e-commerce, retail, and a few other related areas, Catherine Davies, Managing Partner Monticle, who will talk about developments in health tech, and Alexandra Rehak, Associate Director Technology Strategy at Cambridge Consultants, who will cover the consumer angle. You can find their detailed bios on the WiTT website. And now I'd like to turn over to Camille.
Great. Hopefully you can hear me. It's great to be part of this great discussion group once again, though I never thought I'd be talking about this topic. We never did. None of us expected this.
No.
I work for a company called Omdia, and we're a research and consulting firm, but we're part of a larger PLC, a FTSE 100 company called Informa. And we certainly were very much affected by COVID, and because not only we do a lot of business information services, we're also one of the largest events producers in the world. So we do events on yachting, on IT, on mining, whatever. And just a perspective, our revenues in 2019 were just shy of £3 billion. In 2020, our just published revenues were £1.6 billion. So we had to readjust very rapidly, and that included in my organization as well. So virtualizing events, all of that type of thing. So it's been a very a difficult year for us as much as anyone. And that's, on the professional and the personal front. I personally never expected a child of mine to tell me to keep it down because they were having a conference call, but that indeed happened on many occasions as I realized that I need to adjust my behavior. But anyway, what I want to just briefly talk to you about is partly personal insight, built off of some of the research that we do. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to share my screen. I promise not many slides, honest. But hopefully can give us, maybe help direct the conversation. What I'm going to do is talk to you about enterprises. But when I say enterprises, I actually mean from the very smallest to the very largest organizations. Now, tell me, can you see my screen? Hopefully you can. Does anyone want to tell me? Because otherwise I can't hear you.
Yes, we
okay, cool. All right. So I'm just going to go through a few trends that I see, and I'd be really interested in some of your feedback. And what I see is going to be for the long term. I mean, what I'd like to do is start with the people, and what changes we've seen in people, and the workforce, and the emphasis on the workforce. So the first thing I wanted to say is that what COVID has done for us is changed the focus of investment, of technology investment, from the very much, all the sexy tools go to the white collar workers, to a realization that we've been underinvesting, and I think overlooking different types of workers in the workforce. And in fact, most of us on this call, most of us are either desk jockeys or work surfers. We're working in a fixed position, most of us, to do intellectual tasks, and a lot of investment has been focused on those type of workers, even though they're actually a minority in the workforce. And I think what the positive thing from COVID is we've realized our extraordinary dependency on other types of workers, and the fact that they needed better tools. So the Holster nomads out there, the care workers, engineers who are keeping the lights on, those that are delivering, providing logistics services, those types of nomadic and deskless workers are finally getting, I think, are going to get more investment going forwards. I got some of that investment during COVID, and realization that actually we've actually been defining our workforce, and I think a very discriminatory term, assuming that if you sit at a desk, you're an intellectual type of worker, but actually, whatever the physicality of your work, you do knowledge work as well, and you need insights and you need support for those insights. So that's just a point that I want to make, that I think we've been underrepresenting the importance of these types of employees in the workforce. I mean, it's not all hunky-dory in the sense that employers are changing, I think, accelerated patterns that we've seen before. And my employer, like many others, has got some quite fancy offices in central London that sat empty for quite a lot of time, and there's been a rationalization amongst many organizations in terms of the value of the traditional office, rationalization of how much office space you actually need. But not just that. If you are going to get rid of your office, there is still, as we found, a need to meet face-to-face. As much as this is enjoyable, we want to meet face-to-face as well. And so a trend that I had seen before, who wants to go, if you're not going to go into an office, but you still need to have a desk and make that division between work and home, why would you want to commute to a co-location space in a central city location? So a trend that I see going forwards, and watch out, more and more of this, is the regionalization, more provincial, co-working type of locations. And if you are going to stay in, you are still going to be, reporting into an office at some point. What COVID has done is open the door to a far more observed working environment. Before, we used to have systems for intelligent buildings that would manage air conditioning and lighting and things of that nature. Now those types of systems are going to be coupled increasingly with what the people are doing already, the movements of people within building, but also the physical status, a more deeper analysis of the physical status of people in those buildings. Is that okay with you? Is that not okay with you? That's something we need to consider, but certainly very much more scrutiny of attention, whether you're working remotely, your attention, your output, whether you're working remotely or in an office. I was speaking to the CIO in a university last week, giving me a snapshot of how much of observation they do. And because he had said, well, you know, COVID for us has not been too much of an impact because they're a center of excellence in extended reality. And I'm currently doing a project looking at, you know, 5G, the use of virtual environments in the 5G space. And this university is doing a lot in that space. He said, but it's not just that. We use virtual reality. It helps people learn better. The grade point average goes up by 0.2 degrees, but we're also tracking everything that they do. When they join the university, they wear, you know, they get a Fitbit, and we know exactly what they're doing, and you know, they're healthier for it. I could even tell you what, you know, how many rashers of bacon, you know, a student has had. And this type of metered and observed existence will be in the workspace as well as in education going forwards. And I anticipate also, as employers try to reduce their wage obligations, their costs, you know, we're going to see more of the gig worker. The term that the gig worker is the new term. The old term is being a journeyman. You know, if I had, you know, in the 19th century, I know that I had a relative who was a carpenter, and he had one of these sort of passports, and it was the passports, you know, showed what sort of capabilities he had, what sort of work he'd done, whether it was satisfactory or not. And I can imagine going forwards that, as you know, there'll be more freelance type of work where we will certify our capabilities, our security clearances, that type of functional outsourcing and more task-based work is what I expect to see more of from the people side. And whether that's something positive for you or not, I think that type of atomization of work we're going to see more of, and certainly tracking thereof with the tools that we're going to be using more of. So in terms of technology spending, certainly in the short term, investment has, you know, been more limited, but investment is still happening. I mean, this is just a quick snapshot of, you know, a number of industries in terms of trying to relatively show you whether they reduced their expenditure, increased, or whether we saw them increase their expenditure in certain areas. So, you know, public sector governments have done a lot to try to support a number of industries. IT obviously has benefited in terms of budget. Others have not done so well, but they are still spending. The question is, what are they spending on? I would say that some appetites have changed, but in some ways it's just been an acceleration of certain trends. I mean, security to me is an evergreen area that has just become a more complex area. It continues for every digital security or physical security issue that you may overcome as a business. There are new ones that emerge. You know, certainly when you have more remote workers, which is very unexpected in many organizations, particularly smaller organizations who absolutely did not have the right environment to secure what they were doing. So, you know, that's one thing I think we're going to continue to see massive investments in security because the threats continue. The realization I think COVID has given us for the longer term is the absolute need for a very high capacity and high quality networking environment to support what you're doing, those digital interactions and you know, those associated, you know, virtual collaborations that you need to do. So 5G, which is one technology that's coming down the line. Oddly enough, I'm doing some work on the potential for 6G, which, you know, 5G is so great, why would we need 6G? But that's another story. You know, people are realizing that there's something else that they need to do. Whether 5G is the answer or something to supplement what they've already got certainly is in mind, but certainly a number of technologies have now become mainstream, so, software-defined networking and things of that nature. But interestingly, what has made enterprises decide to keep suppliers or lose them, I think, or to remove them, has changed fundamentally. And I think that's is going to be a long-term thing for COVID. It's all about experience. It's all about the digital experience that a supplier can provide you. Whether you're I don't know, a logistics firm like a FedEx, someone of that nature, or if you're a telecoms operator, or I know we're having a discussion on e-commerce, so I won't go into the detail of this, but I think decision making is increasingly about alignment of understanding of digital. And it's very clear to me that many organizations just did not have the right digital strategy. The worst impacted, of course, smaller enterprises. You know, the number one digital challenge for a small enterprise in this during this terrible pandemic time has been how to set up a website and transact digitally. That was the number one digital issue that they had. So enterprises, they will judge you not on price, you know, increasingly, but on experience. And we're becoming more accustomed, and this is not a consumer view, but this is a view from enterprise buyers and enterprise users about the use of digital tools. You know, actually speaking to the call center is less acceptable, becoming less acceptable than actually using whatever online portal is available. Or indeed, surprising to me, recent work that I've done is how satisfied people were, surprised as they were too, and using things like chatbots. They're being used in all sorts of different ways. But we have to be clear about it's not just about saving costs, but actually improving experience. And just a final point, but there's so many things we could talk about. That whole thing about changing, understanding the need for better experience in a digital environment, that really separates different organizations. And this is just one snapshot, just showing different industries in that area of transforming customer experience. And I think it's quite telling. Number one on the list, perhaps it shouldn't surprise us, is retail. They understood that through their experience of COVID, that they found it was even more important for them to improve customer experience. And who's low on the list? Well, wow, it's telecoms. Is that because they're so good at customer experience? I think that's something to debate, but certainly COVID has changed things. And I do not expect us to go back from what we've done and what we've experienced. Anyway, that's my immediate thoughts about the impact of COVID. And obviously there are many other areas we could get into, but those are my immediate thoughts. So thank you.
Thank you, Camille. That's great. So if you, oh, and now we've got an echo. Sorry about that. Some big issues to grapple with later, I think, when it comes to things like security and privacy. But ending on the note of retail is good, because that is a nice segue into Melissa. So Melissa, would you like to share your screen and give your talk?
Hi, I'm Melissa Bane. I'm with Grail Insights, and we are a insights and research agency based around the world. I'm based in London. Despite my accent, Audrey and I did meet in Boston many, many moons ago. I am American, but I've been here in London for about 10 years. And I'm the managing director for the UK and Europe for Grail Insights. So I know that we're supposed to talk for about 10 minutes. I've got a lot of things here to cover, so I will go pretty quickly through this. So feel free to talk through some questions later as needed. Essentially, a couple of quick numbers here on e-commerce last year. So unsurprisingly, global growth around, just over 27%. And again, unsurprisingly, the retail sector was, I was actually surprised these numbers were only minus 3%. Some folks were able to stay open, but obviously the theme here is about how technology has been catapulted by the pandemic. And e-commerce was obviously a big winner. The picture here on the right is what no doubt many of us saw outside of our homes, lots of Amazon boxes, much to my chagrin. I don't need to be making Jeff Bezos any more wealthy, but I have participated there, I will admit it. The other thing that was notable specifically here in the UK, just in January, and granted that was our sort of third lockdown, January year on year saw a 74% increase in e-commerce, which is really crazy numbers. Specifically, when we look at how it's going to be going forward, the numbers are showing just under half of consumers between the ages of 16 to 60 expect to spend more online after the pandemic. So this is not surprising. We've been fundamentally changed. And I think as the numbers that we just saw really bear out, a number of retailers were caught off guard and ill-prepared for this. A number of our clients that we consult were those retailers that were ill-prepared. And Specifically, as a result, there was about 10 billion in investments just between the months of May and July as that panic took hold, with a number of different players, not just in retail, but all different companies trying to get in on the momentum, but reposition themselves appropriately. And it's those investments I'm going to touch on a little bit here. But specifically, I'm going to talk about two different areas of e-commerce. And really, those are falling into the categories of physical e-commerce and then virtual e-commerce. And what do I mean by that? So what has changed? What's changed is how we shop, where we shop, and what we buy. And when I say virtual e-commerce, there's a burgeoning industry here of digital products. In addition to those physical products that show up in those boxes at our front door, there's a lot going on in the virtual world that I think we can learn a lot from. And in terms of technologies that are here to stay, I think it is going to be very interesting to look specifically at some of those. One of the examples here on the right is actually a company called, Zeekit, and I'm going to talk a little bit about them in a minute. If we look at, oops, this is not progressing, there we go. Specifically, and we look at some of the companies that are making real waves here, I think there's three trends that we see after COVID staying with physical e-commerce. And a lot of us have seen these in our own personal lives, specifically the virtual try-on. What does that mean? So we've had a number of smart mirror technologies and 3D technologies that have been emerging for years, but they've really been used as the sparkle at a flagship store for the most part in the retail experience. Post-COVID, we do expect to see this change, driven by a number of different angles, some of which is the technology that was really adopted much more en masse. Again, here in the UK with limited times opening of actual stores, retailers were sort of frantic to try to take that experience back into the home. We saw brands like Sephora and Ulta Beauty offering virtual mirrors, for example, in stores before, but really one mirror for someone to walk by and you could see your lipstick shade change as you looked in the mirror. Ulta Beauty's app now does that through an app on your phone, and you can try on all different makeup from the comfort of your own home. And what's driving that? Not just if you can't get to the store, but actually the hygiene factor. A large percentage of consumers, and I know we're going to talk in another presentation about how consumer has changed, but many consumers are not comfortable with, kind of loose hygiene factors going forward in retail. And that is something we expect to stay. We expect to see a number of things on the consumer front, not just for hygiene. You're unlikely maybe to try on makeup in a store again. If you want to, it's not clear whether you'll ever be allowed to. And so those virtual mirrors are going to really make a difference. And, Amazon, of course, is also paving the way here. I don't know if any of you have heard about Amazon's foray into a hair salon in Spitalfields Market, where they've partnered with a local hairdressing chain, and they're actually using it as a pilot to test out technology, specifically mirror technology, where you can sit in the chair and see all different hairstyles on yourself in different colors. They're doing that because they want to make sure you get one of those mirrors in your home as quickly as possible so they can sell you everything else on it. Similarly, contactless payment. We expect that to stay. So what we saw with a number of the grocery stores moving towards replacing the folks at the checkout with self-service before the pandemic, every brand tried to scramble to do that. And retail chains like Zara have installed just self-checkout, including you removing the security tags yourself at checkout, which could be problematic. And then brands like Muji, which actually incentivize consumers to teach themselves how to check themselves out using the RFID codes, but using a £5 voucher off of your purchase when you check out to teach yourself how to do this. And, there's a number of things about consumer behavior that probably would have been a challenge before the pandemic to get consumers to adopt new technologies like self-checkout. But the incentive after the pandemic, we expect this to really change. And some of the virtual try-on technologies, including, companies like Zeekit, which was the picture I showed before the pandemic, they were just starting to really help manufacturers try on the same dress in different size models virtually without having to do a photo shoot. And now Walmart bought Zeekit last week, and they are planning to use that in their own stores to push their own private label brands, and Levi's as essentially a virtual try-on and a virtual, ability to try that on like you would in a store, but you'll have your own avatar that takes your measurements, and you can try on any of their clothes. So that's the kind of technology we expect to see stay. And the last thing in terms of physical e-commerce that we see likely to last is some of the players like Kazoo that were trying to improve upon a traditional retail experience before the pandemic by replacing what many people find to be unpleasant experience of going into a car dealership and having to buy a car, either new or used. They tried to before really build up the experience and allow that to be something that they curated for, using some technologies to take your preferences and match you to the right make and model. But during the pandemic, having somebody be able to deliver you a car when you were not able to go get one or try it out in the showroom, what they did was really position themselves in that curation mode, in addition to delivering the car and unboxing it for you and giving you this personal shopper experience. That curation is really where we expect to also see technology really last after the pandemic. And companies, there are a lot of other companies like Getter and Wheezy that are trying to do that last mile of food delivery during the pandemic. I think that's a question mark whether we expect to see those stick around post. But I think companies like Kazoo that do a bit more than just the delivery. They're doing curation, they're doing quality assurance, which in the car buying is actually a really big deal. That's likely to stay. So from here, I think something else we want to talk a bit about is, what's driving virtual e-commerce. As I said, this is kind of a different space to be thinking about when we think about e-commerce. And we have seen a significant uptick in a number of brands investing in this space. And I'll talk a little bit more about those in a minute. But specifically, it's not just the pandemic that had everyone sitting at home, spending more time on gaming platforms, on social media platforms, and figuring out how to entertain themselves. God knows we've all watched our share of Netflix. But specifically, certain generations that actually spend more time online and wanting that constant gratification of being able to post new pictures and have this new experience. There was more of a demand for more of a digital retail experience. But it wasn't just the pandemic that was driving this. At the same time, while we all sat at home this past year, we've all learned quite a bit more about the environment and what's happening with the world when we turn all of the polluting machines off, and how we need to be doing more in terms of sustainability. And every brand and every corporation has their own sustainability pitch and communication strategy at this point, but many of the apparel brands specifically are coming under fire for contributing to the problem of fast fashion and leaving a lot of retail clothing in landfills at the end of the day that is really not contributing to a positive impact on the environment. So the drive for sustainability is also playing a role here. The Insta generation of the need to constantly be updating the look online and looking at what's new, which for a while, frankly, has created a dynamic in retail of purchase, post it, return it, is also driving a need towards virtual commerce. And then the last category is really the trend in other sectors like finance for cryptocurrencies and in the art world for non-fungible tokens. There's a drive in other categories as well that's driving a need and an interest in the concept of virtual merchandise. So what do we mean there? Just a few examples. We've got a number of trends here, and the first would really be digital clothing. So when we look at, some of the experiences of how can you experience luxury fashion in a way that lets you, if you are of this particular demographic, wanting to show yourself online, enjoying the product. There are a number of companies now, and the bigger brands are getting into the space where you can actually just buy digital clothes. And there's a couple of companies that's very interesting when you think about the experience. It may sound ridiculous to some people, but for many Instagram influencers and for more and more consumers who are spending more and more of their time in an online world in terms of socializing, digital apparel is actually a very attractive offer. And a number of companies, specifically the company DressX, which is a startup, have started offering their technology to other brands where you can have your brand online and a consumer uploads a picture. You can see on the right-hand side here, you can upload a picture of yourself and pick a particular outfit, pay for the outfit in digital form, and they will put the outfit on your picture so that it looks like you're wearing it. And the technology looks at the drape in the fabrics, and they've used a number of different 3D technologies to actually see how these specific garments should look if you're holding that pose and position. They employ a bunch of 3D graphics technologists. And it's such a specific way to think about how to bridge the gap. Naturally, these technologies are only going to improve. You can see there's actually a significant community that are happy to pay for just a digital image of the product. And it becomes a permanently owned asset of theirs, that image of them in that article of clothing. But you can imagine that for the luxury industry, which faces significant problems with counterfeits, that connecting real world products with an online version allows them to actually track and control more specific, really the copyright over those products, and try to reduce the ability for those to be copied. And if you're looking at blockchain technologies and you know that you're purchasing a particular product and it's only one of 50 that's allowed out in the world, you're able to really prove that you have paid for that and it is in fact yours. There's some real advantage there for the industry, which loses billions a year in counterfeit. So, this is something we do see growing, and, it didn't come out of nowhere, right? And I mentioned earlier that consumers are spending more time online. So where does the concept of this come from? Well, last year, a lot of consumers turned towards online gaming, and the concept of digital clothing actually comes from digital skins in online games. And this is something that's been around for quite some time, but last year with the growth in online gaming platforms like League of Legends, and I'll talk about who the character is on the right in a moment. As we all sat at home, many of us, including specifically my teenager and most of the teenagers that I know, spent more and more of their time online gaming so that they actually could socialize when they weren't allowed to be going anywhere. And the character on the right is actually a character that is very popular in League of Legends. This is a particular game. The character is Kiana. She's one of the champions that's played, and all the characters are called champions. And if you notice the details of the earrings she's wearing and what she's sitting on, this is actually the tie-up with LVMH, who launched a specific skin in League of Legends for this character. And what they were able to do is essentially customize her look, and she has a very particular persona in the game. And they also did a digital capsule as well of products, which you can see on the lower left, of a backpack and t-shirts with her character on it. To give you an idea of what these things sell for, these skins can run up to about $300 in value. And to buy all of the skins on average for a character, it can run up to about $2,000. On average, the average user spends about $100 a year outfitting their characters. And if you think about it, this is products that you would never see unless you were in this platform, but it's a way for users to differentiate themselves and also express their own personality through the character. And LVMH is hardly the only one in there. Gucci has been in a variety of different platforms. Specifically, they have been playing in Roblox, which is another online gaming platform. And to give you some context of these gaming platforms, League of Legends has about 115 million active users every day. And Roblox has 42 million daily users. These are platforms that are quickly eclipsing some of the major entertainment vehicles in the world, including, I think, the 4 major sports industries in the US combined are not able to keep up now with League of Legends in terms of reach. And that's a real shift. And the pandemic is really what drove a huge surge. Some of these gaming platforms are struggling to keep their servers up. I know a number of users who've been left online waiting to get in. At one point, my son was complaining that he was in line with 428,000 other people waiting for 40 minutes to get on the platform. It's an area where the fastest growing demographic in these platforms is 17 to 24-year-olds. So this is a way for apparel brands to reach a whole new demographic, but also drive engagement through the personalities of the characters, which is very interesting. Nike is also in here and also offering, I think, as you had seen probably earlier in the news, offering digital products of certain lines of their sneakers, limited editions. So they collaborated with other Japanese brands as well, and done a number of different skins for different characters. After this character was introduced, they introduced another champion with LVMH, and it's been a wild success so far. So, but things like this, Gucci is working on Roblox, but also 7 other gaming platforms, and outfitting characters, outfitting skins for individual champions. And last year, you may or may not know, Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez did a live stream with the brand Among Us, the game Among Us, and raised money online, and it was one of their biggest events. But I'm going to talk a little bit in a minute about some of the other events that are taking place online. Animal Crossing, which is another popular gaming platform, launched with Net-a-Porter in China in April, and introduced skins from the spring and summer collections for local Chinese luxury brands. And again, this isn't something that you necessarily see every day, but it's a whole nother world that has burgeoned since the pandemic that we do not expect to change. As someone described it to me, it's like Ready Player One, but today. And we're not all living in containers somewhere. So where did this come from, right? We see other commerce taking place in these gaming platforms, and specifically the entertainment industry, which was hit so badly last year with having to cancel in-person concerts around the world. A number of the smarter and faster moving artists out there. So these are actually pictures on the right. On the lower left, you can see a pop artist called Lil Nas, and he did a concert in Roblox in November of 2020. And that had 36.9 million visitors to the concert. So he was unable to do any concerts in person, but instead went on here in avatar form, and you can see very small, but the folks that were in Roblox at the time, you show up to the concert in your little avatar and can play around and can get limited edition products and skins while he's doing the concert. He did this as a promotion, and most of them are doing it as a promotion to try to get themselves more exposure and to engage. And what they do is often play the game for a short while at the end, and also have some of the YouTube gamers online playing at the same time. The second picture up there is Travis Scott. He did a concert for 12 million fans on Fortnite. And the visuals and the technology are pretty amazing. There's videos on YouTube of this online just to see what the engagement looks like. But what it does is allow them to have complete creative freedom to be online, and also promote products within the game that you wouldn't necessarily see offline. And this is, as we've said, definitely an area that we expect to see growing. Just the merchandise sales during the concerts themselves were in the millions. And again, for a very brand new way of engaging with fans, this was a way that we saw some entertainers turning to try to promote themselves. But the question here is really, what else could they be learning, and who else could we learn from when it comes to really leading the way for e-commerce tech trends? And K-pop, or Korean pop bands, have really been leading the way in terms of technology usage for the last 5 years. And specifically during the pandemic, they showed up everyone. And what we've got here is basically a usage of augmented reality staging and connected gadgets, which allowed them to really pivot very quickly during the pandemic. And while most entertainers were losing millions in canceled concerts, these guys turned around and have the technology investment that they've already been making through companies like DM Entertainment in Korea. And 2 things that they're doing really well. So the picture at the top with the picture of the guy sort of using the other dancers like puppets. they were able to have concerts where they could get online and actually work with, what you see below there is a K-pop light stick. I don't know if you're familiar with K-pop, but a band like BTS, which is one of the most popular Korean pop bands, you often buy a customized light stick according to your band. So K-pop light sticks have been around for a long time. It's essentially the modern day version of the lighter at a concert or using your flashlight on your phone. For K-pop, this is very specific, and each band has designed its own light stick, which it used to be that consumers would bring those to concerts. And what happened during the pandemic was they were able to shift towards completely virtual concerts, and they could be immersed underwater in the middle of a song. And as you can see, one of the singers could grow to look like a giant over the others. And it was a very interactive and visually rich experience. But what they were able to do is, you can see the girl band below, which is the girl band Blackpink. All of the users are actually on screens. All of the video users are behind them on those screens. And they were able to move, in some of the concerts where you would normally be, in one city. The band BTS had a concert, their Bang Bang Con event reached just under 800,000 people in one concert. And these are paid for concerts. That's the big difference. Users were willing to pay $40 a ticket to experience this. And the reason I brought up the light sticks is because if you bought your light stick, which retails between $60 and $80 for BTS, their specific light stick, they actually had 500,000 people in about 162 different countries, that in the different songs, when they would change, the light stick would change color. And all of the fans felt connected in a completely different way at a time when people were really trapped at home feeling very alone. But the question here is, will that ever change? Will they now just use this technology to have this entertainment experience anywhere in the world? If they can't travel, some folks will always want to go back to in-person entertainment. But as someone was mentioning to me earlier today, there's a good portion of the population that don't want to go to a large crowded concert area, especially here when we've seen what's happened with the Ariana Grande concert in Manchester with the bombing a few years ago. There's a number of reasons that aren't just the pandemic that this technology might meet a need for. And what K-pop does in general, they tend to be a lot further ahead than many of the other players in the music industry. But from a technology perspective in particular, they are really setting the tone for how to engage with consumers using technology. And the pandemic has really just pushed that forward. So these are some different examples that I thought might kind of get people thinking about how things could be different in future, and really where we see a lot of the luxury industry and the entertainment industry leveraging those digitally going forward.
That's great, Melissa. Thank you very much. I've learned quite a lot. And I can definitely see some integrations with Zoom in the future. Instead of just having virtual backgrounds, now we can all have virtual outfits and hats and things.
Absolutely.
I'm sure it's coming. Thank you very much for that. Okay, so let's move on to a totally different topic, which is health tech. And Catherine.
Thank you so much. I'm completely blown away by these presentations and all these insights so far. I feel like health is we're way behind in health. We're so far behind. So yeah, I will take you through my presentation. This is really fascinating. I can't believe people are spending so much money on things that are only digital, that aren't real. It's unbelievable. So I'm Catherine Davies. I'm the managing partner of Monticle, and we help innovative companies that want to partner with the NHS. So I'm just going to give a little bit of pre-pandemic context to the NHS, and then I'll talk a little bit about what's been happening. So what was already happening pre-pandemic was we were seeing demand for health services and pressures on the NHS increase significantly. So these charts show essentially an upward trajectory, both for general practice and for admissions into hospital, emergency admissions and planned hospital admissions. The sort of some of the context for this is the sort of profile of disease has changed significantly since the NHS was established in 1948. It used to be people would become ill and then essentially be cured of their illness and sent back to work to pay their taxes to fund the NHS, or they would sadly pass away and then no longer need to avail themselves of the help of the NHS. But that has really changed very significantly. So now we see people with lots of different conditions at once and complex long-term conditions. So people are living for longer, but they're sicker. And that then obviously creates significant demand onto the system. The biggest killers at the moment are currently heart disease, dementia, stroke, and lung cancer, which are all difficult things to manage, as I'm sure you can imagine. You may have heard people say that after the Chinese railways, I think they say the NHS is the biggest employer. There are currently around 1.2 million people employed by the NHS in England, but there are really significant staffing challenges as well. So in 2019, we had 44,000 nurse vacancies and over 9,000 doctor vacancies in the NHS. So you have this perfect storm where demand for the service is increasing and the number of people able to actually deliver the services is decreasing, with very significant vacancies that creates, real problems across the system. Just to give you a sense of it, a hospital in London, such as the Royal Free, employs around 10,000 people. So, employing staff is, a really, really significant challenge and something to get right. I think it's fair to say that there's been variable adoption of tech in the NHS, or not very much adoption of tech in the NHS, depending on sort of how charitable you're feeling. The National Audit Office published a report last year that essentially said the record for digital transformation in the NHS has been very poor, and past initiatives haven't really achieved the things that they've set out to achieve. And we'll talk a little bit about what some of the challenges are. So cast your mind back to just over a year ago. In March last year, Simon Stevens, who's essentially the head of the NHS, he's the chief executive of NHS England, he asked NHS hospitals to urgently discharge all hospital inpatients to free up capacity to treat people with COVID, and to postpone all non-urgent elective operations for a period of time, for several months. It was then extended. So essentially what happened was business as usual was paused so that the NHS could free up capacity to deal with COVID. So there were obviously, very well documented, incredible efforts from the NHS on COVID treatment to deal with a condition that we didn't know or understand at all. And there were also obviously been fantastic efforts in terms of COVID vaccinations more recently. But some of the consequences of that has been that 6 million fewer patients were referred to treatment in 2020 than 2019. And we have ended up with a situation where we have 4.7 million patients waiting for treatment in April this year, which is a historic high. So you essentially had increasing demand, a pause in supply, which has then led to this absolutely massive backlog. We've also had very significant rises in 52-week waits for care. So these are people who are waiting to have hip operations and knee operations who are supposed to be seen in 18 weeks are now waiting for longer than a year for their first outpatient appointment with a consultant. So that's quite scary. And we think that many fewer people have come forward to receive a cancer diagnosis, which is very significant because obviously the situation with undiagnosed cancer is very, very serious indeed, and cancer can become much more advanced while you're waiting for that diagnosis and treatment. So in 2020 and 2021, there has been significant digital transformation in health, and in the next couple of slides, I'm just going to try and sort of highlight some of the key things that have happened. This graphic was produced by NHSX, which was an arm's length body established by Matt Hancock to really drive the adoption of digital health across the NHS. So they talk about lots of different things that they've done, but I think some of the key ones here to pull out are the fact that the NHS centrally organised access for all of the NHS to Office 365, which meant that they could use Microsoft Teams. So before, they were in all different and outdated versions of Office products. So that then meant that a lot of NHS staff for the first time really could work at home. So people had never been able to work at home before. So that really created quite a transformation in terms of workforce, allowing people to work more flexibly, to look after children, to keep themselves safe and so on. So I think that was a really interesting development. Something else which I think is interesting is that the number of people using the NHS app increased significantly, and the NHS login, which allows patients to log into a portal to interact with a bit of the health service that they're in touch with anyway. So we see this very significant increase in remote and digital access from patients. Then I'm not sure if you can see all the different things on this slide, but one of the other things that I would also just highlight here is the fact that the NHS is really starting to try to use technologies such as artificial intelligence to help with diagnosis and treatment. So there's a very significant project that's underway where chest x-rays from across the NHS are sent to a sort of central portal. And the idea is that we'll be able to use artificial intelligence to look for patterns and to be able to predict what's happening there. So I think the increasing use of AI in health is really interesting. So when people were sent home from hospital and told to stay at home, obviously people still needed to access care. So we saw the virtualization of healthcare. Access has been completely transformed. And I think, this is probably the key development that we've seen in health over the last year or so. So in this graphic, you can see the change in appointments. So there used to be face-to-face appointments in primary care. Those disappeared. And then you saw this increase in telephone appointments, actually, mainly. There was a decrease in the number of people accessing primary care in general. So people weren't going to see their doctor. But we see this increase in telephone appointments. And, this is one of the things that I think is interesting when I think about Melissa's talk that she's just given and all these amazing things happening, in the gaming industry. Although we're talking about significant digital disruption in the NHS, we are talking about people just being able to speak to their GP on the phone, right? So it's not really, earth shattering, it's kind of basic, but nonetheless, I think it is very important. The diagram on the right-hand side is from the Royal National Orthopaedic Hospital in Stanmore, and it's showing the shift between outpatient appointments that were done in person and outpatient appointments that have been conducted by video consultation. So I think in general practice, we see GPs speaking to their patients on the phone, but in hospitals, we've actually seen quite a significant increase in video consultations, because you can imagine if a consultant is dealing with somebody who has an orthopedic condition that needs managing, it is quite important to be able to actually see them and understand what's happening there. The other thing which is interesting is that we've seen remote monitoring, or virtual wards as they're normally referred to. So for example, when the pandemic was at its peak, we gave people pulse oximetry devices that would help them measure their blood oxygen levels so they could keep an eye on their own health at home and then come into hospital only if they needed to. So the other thing that was happening in hospitals, so all the non-COVID patients were discharged, but then with COVID patients coming in, they obviously had to be spaced out slightly differently. So the capacity to treat the same number of people was diminished in any event, and that led to the increasing use of virtual wards. Other key developments worth highlighting here: tech to manage the pandemic, was again, very innovative from the NHS perspective. So we have NHS 111, which is a number that you may have called in the past. NHS 111 online was set up quite quickly because the call handling service was completely overwhelmed by people phoning up and asking for advice. And then just text messaging. So you have GP practices using text messages and other bits of the system using text message to give information to shielded people, or for GPs to communicate with their patient lists. Again, this isn't something that was happening before. It had started to happen, but it's very patchy, and that's definitely gathered momentum. We've also seen this surge, as I mentioned, in patients' uptake of remote health services, including registrations for the NHS app and the login, as I said. Also e-prescription services that help people manage their prescription virtually themselves. So they can just order another prescription when they need it and ask for it to be sent to a particular pharmacy. And so I think really one of the interesting themes here is that the imagination gap has been closed. So people would say, but how can you run the NHS virtually? And we've seen that it is possible. So I think that that's been quite interesting. The think tank, the Health Foundation, published a report earlier this year looking at increased use of technologies during the pandemic, and it did find some quite interesting things here. So most people found the experience positive, but slightly older people who probably have a higher need for healthcare thought that the technology enabled approaches made for worse quality of care. So I think that raises some quite interesting issues going forward about making sure that we don't end up with a system that doesn't actually give people the care that they need for, for their healthcare, while capturing the benefits of the technologies that we've seen. So I think it is quite a tricky balance. In terms of what will probably stay, I think that we'll continue to have remote consultations. I don't think we'll go back to a world where you have to attend consultations in person all the time. A lot of the time, the way the system was set up was, you may have experienced this yourself, you would get a letter sent to you saying you have an appointment in hospital with your consultant at this day on this time. If you couldn't attend, then there wasn't really even a mechanism to tell people that you weren't free. And if you could attend, you'd obviously have to take time off work and go, and the consultant would ask you how you were, and you would say that you were fine, and then you'd go on your way. So it wasn't a good use really of anybody's time. So I think the remote consultations can certainly be much more efficient, which can help ease some of these workforce pressures. I think we'll see more remote monitoring and self-management. It seems to be a trend that we're seeing in other bits in consumer tech. Perhaps this is something I think that we're coming on to shortly. And I do think, to have a sustainable publicly funded NHS service, we do need to encourage people to take more responsibility for their own health and care if they can. So I think that people have become more confident managing their care, their prescriptions, and some of their conditions themselves online. And I think that will probably continue. I think remote working will continue, which provides flexibility for staff, which I think will also help with some of the staffing pressures that I outlined at the beginning. And I think we'll probably see, the NHS app and other apps continue. I think, though, there is a bit of a challenge around the number of apps that we're seeing and the way they actually work. So, for example, one hospital I was in touch with recently said that they were involved one way or another with 200 apps, and they're trying to coordinate their patients using 200 apps and trying to work out, for those apps where patients are uploading data that their clinician needs to see, like where that data is going, how it's being recorded, who's responsible for, taking action if something's not right and the patient needs to come into hospital. So I think there are some quite tricky operational challenges there. I think there's less fear around tech, although people are still very cautious about privacy and those issues. And I think that still needs a little bit of work. We're getting more confident to use AI. So one of the examples that I've seen that I think is really good is to do with breast cancer screening. So a lot of breast cancer screening stopped during the pandemic. Some hospitals are now using AI to essentially risk stratify women on the waiting list for breast cancer screening. So rather than go through the list in the order that people would have been seen if they've come in, trusts are able to use AI to identify those women at a higher risk of breast cancer, so they can come in to be screened first, and then they can commence treatment if needed. So there's a really innovative company called Monticle that's really leading the way when it comes to breast cancer screening. So I think that's very interesting. And we've also seen the emergence of companies that are able to use AI to help GPs and others diagnose skin cancer at a much earlier stage. So if you have a mole that you're concerned about, your GP can use artificial intelligence to diagnose the image as likely to be problematic or not, and then triage you appropriately. So I think that's really interesting. So in terms of what we've learned, I think, tech can really help. It's been incredible to see what's happened across the NHS over the last year. But as I said, a lot of the tech we're talking about, I'm not talking about the AI here so much, but a lot of the other tech we've used is quite straightforward. It is being able to speak to a doctor on the phone and so on. Interoperability is really important because within trusts, we're seeing different departments make decisions about the type of tech that they'd like to use in their ward. So the cardiologists might be using something different to the oncologists. And there needs to be some way that all of this different technology can kind of be accessed, I think, centrally across a common platform, at least in single hospitals, if not across regions. So there has been transformation, but we really need to keep the momentum. The NHS has a bit of a habit. Sometimes it's described as an elastic band. You sort of stretch it in one direction and let go, and then it pings back to where it started. So I think we don't want that to happen here, because I think we have made some really interesting advances. Purchasing is still incredibly localized. So even where you have these national initiatives, local organizations still need to make the decision to actually purchase the innovation, which means that you have a huge amount of fragmentation. And if you're a tech company that's trying to scale up, it really is very challenging to generate the revenues that you need to be able to grow your business. So we do see a lot of tech companies focusing on the insured bit of the system or private health, because it is just so hard to scale in the NHS. I think as well, there is insufficient funding. So some companies made their technology available to the NHS for free to try and demonstrate their value proposition during the pandemic. And then they're now in a situation where the NHS is saying, we can't afford to buy this out of our existing budget, so we can't use it, which really is a shame. I think we do need to make more funding available. There are also planned legislative changes coming down the track. So the Secretary of State wants to have greater powers to direct the system. So we had been going through a process of making the NHS more independent from government, although it will always be extremely political. But now we're going back in the opposite direction to enable the Secretary of State to be much more interventionist. Simon Stevens is leaving the NHS in the summer, and his replacement is currently being recruited. It'll be interesting to see who comes in to run the system. And I think there are some other slightly funny things that have happened. So although we're saying we want innovation, the slogan "Protect the NHS," has really made its way into the public consciousness. And so there is a sort of an ideological opposition to other companies coming in to work with the NHS in partnership. And I think the planned legislative changes sort of move the system away from a marketization of publicly funded healthcare services towards a more state-provided system, which I think poses some risks potentially to innovation and partnership working. So there, I shall stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Catherine. That was very good overview of all different aspects of what's going on in health tech. So we very much appreciate that.
Thank you.
And now we'll move on to our final speaker. Alexandra, would you like to share and speak?
Right. So hi, everybody. First off, thanks very much, Audrey and WiTT, for inviting me along to speak on this great panel tonight. I'm Alexandra. I'm going to talk about COVID and consumer tech impact. And I have to say, it's been great hearing the previous presentations, because there are a few places where you're going to see some interesting overlap in terms of what we've just heard about and what we're talking about on the consumer front. Just to quickly introduce a little bit about the company I work for, so Cambridge Consultants. If you don't know us, we are a design partner for engineering and technology innovation. So we work with companies across lots of different sectors, as you can see there on the screen. And one of those is consumer. And really what we do is try to help organizations that are looking at using technology for really differentiation and innovation, looking far ahead into the future. So lots and lots of very, very cool stuff. So with this great assignment to look at COVID-19 and the impact on consumer, of course, like all of us, I have thought about what the impact has been on my own life and experience over the past 15 months, and also looked out at the market and at what we've seen from our company and what I've seen personally. So three things really jumped out at me. The first, and this is going back to some of the points you raised initially, Audrey, was this massive acceleration of digital for consumers. So we've seen that on a few different fronts that I'll go into, but I think there's no doubt that that is real and a trend. Second, which is kind of tied in with that, is that I think we've exposed a little bit that the idea of a digital native as some kind of separate generation is a bit of a myth, because what we have seen is that really people of all different ages, and in particular older people, have been very quick to adopt a lot of new technologies during this time to stay connected with people, to stay connected with healthcare, etc. Third is that COVID's really changed the way we spend our time. Now that seems obvious, but there are a few specific things, again, linked to tech that are relevant here. And really the view is that a lot of the changes are likely to be long-term. So as much as you might want to smash your keyboard like the guy in the picture, that's probably not a good option. So what's changed? If we look at this acceleration of digital consumerism, call it that, I mean, first of all, the use of digital has generally accelerated across all age groups. And that, again, we'd say is a permanent shift. And that's everything from using online shopping to telemedicine to contactless payments to video gaming. So we're seeing those things seeing increasing take up across really all different age groups, not just what we call digital natives. So just as an example, if you look down on the box on the bottom right, video games. So we heard some great stats and great examples on video games from Melissa. That is a trend that was going on before COVID in terms of increasing use of video games across various different platforms, whether a smartphone or a console or a computer. But what we saw was that there's been a massive increase in that during the COVID period. And as you can see, it's a significant increase across multiple generations. It's not just teenagers. Certainly I can speak from my experience in my own house that my husband, who is 50 plus, probably spends as much time playing games on his phone as one of my teenagers does. So it's interesting what that's brought out. I think other changes that have come out, a lot more interest in digital health and wellness generally among consumers, a lot of interest in DIY and hobbies, which is less techie, but things like apps that are telling you how to do and what to do in those areas have been coming up a lot. And then finally, online video platforms for social. So some of that is the standard kind of social media, Facebook and so on, but some of it is newer things like TikTok, and some of it is things you might not expect, like Tinder, as I'll come on to in a minute. So telehealth, and I think here, Catherine, I'm going to pick up on a few of the points that you were making, but looking at it a little more from the consumer perspective. I mean, first off, this massive shift that you were just speaking about to online consultation has just been revolutionary in the NHS, and that has been the case in other countries as well. One interesting example here of what enabled that was the AccuRx app, which here in the UK was developed by a company that had been around for a few years, but literally developed over a weekend at the start of the pandemic, and is now being used by more than 95% of GP practices for scheduling and delivering video consultations. And as you can see, the word about that is getting out to patients and consumers in lots of different ways. So on the right, you see a picture of a link to a YouTube video on how to send your GP a photo with AccuRx. So there are lots of different channels that people are using to find out about how to get more familiar with these kinds of platforms. And it's a big shift. Consumer healthcare device use at home is really a second big trend. Now, in some cases, this is led by providers. So again, Catherine, some of the examples that you were giving about oxygen measuring and so on at home. The example that I have here on the right, you see the finger on the button on top of what looks like a little camera device. That's called a PAMAN remote monitoring system. It's a little bit like an Alexa with a video camera, and that's being deployed in Liverpool as part of the 5G testbed project there. And really what that's used for is for people, whether elderly or ill, who are at home and during the pandemic really have been, very much stuck at home, but who need support and assistance for medication monitoring. And what you do is press the button on top of that device if you're the patient at home, call your pharmacist, and your pharmacist can then watch you on a tablet using that to see how you're taking your medication, to make sure that you're taking it in the right way, to give you advice on how to combine medications, to make sure you're taking things on time. And that's then all recorded as well in an electronic health record, so that if, for example, your son then calls up later on that day and says, I want to know if mom's been taking her medication on time, there's a record of that, so that it's all integrated effectively. So those kinds of devices, we expect to see more and more of those in people's homes, enabling, more kind of independent living and independent use of medical self-care types of devices, but with support. So always with support from a person. And part of the interest here is that it gives some interaction to the person who's at home as well. Now, in some other instances, I've seen a lot more examples of consumer-led medical devices. So at the bottom there on the right, you see a connected thermometer. It's called the Kinsa Thermometer. This is a use case from the US. This has been an amazing story in the pandemic. Basically, this is a company that had been around for 9 years and had thermometers which are connected using Bluetooth to smartphones, so to an app. And what's happened at the start of the pandemic was that not only did these thermometers start selling in massive numbers as people were trying to monitor themselves and their families for signs of COVID, but the details of the temperatures that were being taken all over the US where this is sold were feeding into a central platform. And Kinsa was then able to use that to see where there were potential spikes in people's temperatures that were being reported that might be linked to COVID outbreaks. And they were basically getting about a 3-week lead on areas of the US where COVID outbreaks were likely to be taking place. And they were able to do that because they had a lot of data from previous years on typical temperature readings from different parts of the country and how those linked up to colds and flus and things like that. And they were able to use that database then to benchmark against some of the temperature information coming in during COVID. And that's still being used now. So I think there are about 2 million of these thermometers being actively used now in the US. And it's been an incredible tool, I think, for following what's happening with the pandemic, as well as obviously bringing lots of comfort and support to the people who are using the thermometers. Now, another area that's health linked is around personal fitness at home. And that's something, again, where there's been a lot of growth and activity during the pandemic. So the example that probably all of us are familiar with is Peloton. Certainly, we've all seen the ads, love them or hate them. But it's undeniable that Peloton's success during the pandemic has been really dramatic. So the chart that you see there on the left is how much their revenues have grown. They managed to quadruple their subscribers between Q1 2020 and Q2 of this year. And you can see the impact on the revenues there. So not only is this to do with selling bikes and also people using their app, which you can use as well without having the actual bike in your home, but in addition, people doubled the amount of workouts that they were doing. So just again, a phenomenal change in the amount of time that people are spending on this activity. Obviously, gyms were closed. There was some risk associated with going out and exercising, even with other people. So lots more focus on that kind of in-home fitness. Now, if you look on the right, what you can see is, and this harks back a little bit to some of the things you were showing, Melissa, on the retail side, a smart mirror device, which is part of an AI-enabled home fitness system from a company called Form. So I should say this is a company that Cambridge Consultants has supported in developing this. And essentially what you do is you place this on your wall. It's about 6 feet tall. If you have it turned off, it just looks like a lovely chic mirror. So it's been designed by a very famous industrial designer. So it's meant to be part of your home furnishing. But when you want to use it, you set it up, you turn it on, you can access on demand or on schedule a personalized fitness program with a celebrity trainer who appears there in the mirror in front of you and can give you feedback on what you're doing through the devices which are attached to the side of the mirror, and set out a program for you and so on. So it's very motivating. It's very personalized, and again, it's very safe. It's in your home. You don't have to go out to do this. So this is something where, again, I don't expect we would see this technology in everybody's home anytime soon, but certainly it's seeing great traction so far. It's quite a high-end product, but this type of technology is certainly going to be coming out in a lot of different types of environments, including retail, but in fitness very much so as well. So now that you've spent all that time getting fit and looking at yourself in the mirror, what happens next? Well, unbelievably, at least to me, people are also spending a lot more time on dating apps in COVID. And I thought this might be a fitting finish to our discussion about consumer trends this evening. So some of the things that I discovered in looking into this, and I should say here, I've been married for 22 years, so I have not really spent a lot of time on dating apps myself, but was tipped off to this by a friend, of course. Tinder recorded their highest ever number of swipes on a single day, 3 billion swipes, close to the start of the pandemic in March 2020. OkCupid saw a 700% increase in dates between March and May 2020. And Bumble dating app saw an increase of 70% in video calls during that same period. And what you can see in the chart on the right is actually that global dating app revenue going up very dramatically in 2020. So this might seem counterintuitive. How can it be? People weren't really able to go out on dates properly. All venues were closed, etc. You weren't really supposed to be mixing with other people. So what's going on here? People really looking for engagement online. And also some interesting, and again, it harks back, Melissa, to some of the things that you were talking about with the digital goods and digital gifts and so on. A whole ecosystem has grown up around live streaming video chat rooms within these dating apps. And you can bring guests on, you can have contests and dance-offs, all sorts of things. And then there's a whole virtual gifting element, which has been brought into this. So you can buy somebody a virtual gift, which might be, a virtual teddy bear or something seasonal or something very fancy. I gather that the entry point for this is about 10 cents and the price goes up to about $250. So it's a really interesting way of bringing all of this again into the virtual world, but which is very engaging for people, and lots of sort of different games that are being built up around this. And the end results, similar to what people are finding in the world of video games, is that people are finding connections that they weren't finding offline, and really more of a sense of community. So it's very, very interesting, I thought. So final thoughts. A number of these trends around accelerated adoption of new technology in remote healthcare, in work education, which we haven't talked about so much, and in fitness, we see those being, very much the norm going forward. We don't expect to see a lot of rollback in those. Video interaction in particular, and on demand for consumer services and experience have really become much more important during the pandemic. So again, not something that's likely to roll back. Some challenges for sure. One is just around access to broadband for this. So even here in the UK, 4% of UK households still not connected with broadband. So you do have still a significant digital divide, and obviously much greater in some other markets than here. lack of standards around a lot of these apps, market fragmentation certainly are holding things back in some ways. And then, as mentioned by the other speakers, definitely concerns around data privacy and also, increasingly around cybersecurity. And I think that will become more and more evident going forward as we have more and more breaches, unfortunately. But I would expect to see that. So that's it. Thank you very much. And we'll throw it back to you, Audrey.
Great. Thank you, Alexandra. Thank you all. That was incredible. I've learned quite a lot, especially about things I never expected to learn anything about. Like K-pop. So if the rest of you would like to turn your cameras back on, you don't have to, but if you'd like to, please go ahead. And we have run a little bit late, so I'm going to ask first if anybody else has any burning questions they would like to ask our speakers. Then I'd be happy to let you go first. But if not, well, maybe while you're all thinking about it, I will ask, of course, we could have an entire event on security and privacy and all of this move toward more digitization and what's become of it. There are plenty of new scams out there related to parcel delivery just for one. Of course, a lot more ransomware, as we've all seen in the US with pipelines. What do you all think is going to happen? Obviously, we'll need more security, and it was very good for Darktrace that they happened to go public during all of this, I think. But have you seen any move toward improved security, any changes in the way we all are using some of these products and services that will improve the situation? Anybody want to jump in on that? I know it's a slightly vague question. Catherine?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, in health, we've seen the opposite. So NHSX put out some guidance in conjunction with the Information Commissioner's Office about information governance and whatnot, sort of saying we'll be pragmatic. And, a lot of trust. So, one of the reasons that AccuRx were able to develop their offer was because it's a secure video conversation. But the reality is a lot of trusts are still using WhatsApp, including video capability on WhatsApp. Consultants and other clinicians are sharing, pictures of patients and asking for views and, using WhatsApp. And sometimes, people can leave organizations and no longer be employees, but still be on the WhatsApp group because they're using their personal devices. So unfortunately, I think in the health sector, there are quite high risks of data breaches and significant security risks that we've just parked for now, because so often that is a reason not to share information and data. And I think the view from the centre was we just need to get virtual working to work as best we can in a national emergency. And we'll come back to all of this difficult security and data protection later. So it will be interesting to see what happens.
Yeah. Camille?
Yeah, I just had one comment, and that's around digital identity. We haven't spoken enough about that, but two reasons. One is when you're buying something, gosh, it's a pain to type in all of your information. So why can't we have some standardized digital identity? But of course, digital, and there is some of that around. But what we need to think about is not digital identity from a transactional perspective, but actually in the future, it will be live. It will be constant digital verification of identity, of your identity, but also the physical tracking and also status of certain objects, let's say like a pipeline. So we will be looking at that. So, but I'm just want to say identity is something we haven't talked enough about, but that is one thing that COVID has brought out, a greater understanding of the need for digital identity management.
Yes, Melissa.
I was just going to add to that, which is that, one of the examples about contactless e-commerce is palm scanning. And, Amazon is already trialing that at 2 stores in Seattle, and they plan to roll it out to all of the Whole Foods markets that they now own, which is the ability to have your palm scanned. And it's not just the ridges in your skin, but the kind of map of your veins inside your hand. And, now that we're all in this new world, the question remains of how comfortable consumers will be to trade that off for the security around their own personal information. because I think we've seen so many of these, breaches and identity thefts. And I think the more that people are told this will not just make things easier, but it will make it more hygienic because you're not touching anything, but also it will protect your personal data. I think some of that hesitancy may go away. It sounds a little science fiction-y, but it's already being trialed. So it'll be interesting to see, I think.
Yeah, I agree. Do we have any questions from anyone in the audience?
I have a question.
Okay, Helen.
As we all turn into avatars and get onto Tinder, even if we've been married for 25 years, what's people's view of how this will affect society's well-being? And the reason I ask that is because I read something recently that said that boys have fared better than girls during COVID and lockdown because they've been busy playing Xbox with all their mates, and that girls hadn't. And just wanted to get anyone's perspective, if anyone does have a perspective on that.
Yeah, great question. Anyone like to start on that?
Yeah.
Melissa?
Yeah, I'll try there. I do think that I have seen similar data about teenage boys faring better from a mental health perspective during the pandemic than teenage girls. And I do think gaming plays a role there. I think that it has become a destination for socializing. And, it's natural generationally for me to, for example, question my teenage son and say, oh God, you're spending a lot of time looking at that screen, doing homeschool and then being online. And he said, you know what, Mom, there are kids who never would have been able to socialize at school that are able to now come in and join our game group because they are too quiet or too shy, and they are actually able to take on a completely different identity because they can be behind the screen. So I think that's something to consider.
That's amazing. I always think about the poor extroverts. I don't think about how this is unleashing the introverts. It's amazing, isn't it? What a way to look at it.
It was something I hadn't considered. And I think it's, on the other side of it, the social media pressure, I think, which does tend to just break down more on the lines of a teenage girl, to constantly be improving her look and her skin. And the technology is now available to smooth you out and make you look more perfect. And that's different than when you look in a non-augmented reality mirror.
Yeah.
And I think that's a challenge. I know for probably everyone else here, staring at myself on Teams all day has not been great for my mental health, and I don't need to look at myself all day long. So I think, but I'm a different generation, right? I think generationally, it's a different experience.
Yeah. Catherine, you were going to add something.
Yeah, I was just going to say, sorry, something I didn't touch on in my presentation because I didn't have time, but I mean, there is a massive mental health crisis coming down the track that I think has been exacerbated. I can't remember the numbers off the top of my head, but the stats for the number of people who feel lonely in the UK is really high. It's really, really very striking indeed. So, there are a number of people with really significant anxiety, depression, mental health problems, and that's being reflected in the numbers turning up into the system. I think the NHS is trying to get much better on access. So talking therapies and so on are being designed to be easier to access. People can self-refer into those types of mental health support. The challenge that we often have with mental health treatment in the NHS is to measure its efficacy. It's obviously, not the same as fixing a physical injury, but I think again, there's some interesting technology out there that can help provide some options for measuring outcomes. So I think that access and outcome measurements are two key challenges in the mental health space, and there's quite a lot of work going on in that area, which is encouraging.
Thank you. Thanks, Dave.
And Alex.
I would just echo the point that I think in a lot of ways, the whole gaming world has become quite a social destination, and that it's much more positive than you might think as a parent. Not all positive for sure, but that conversation about, getting other people involved and it being a place to hang out with friends and all of that, it certainly rings true. Whether that's as true for girls, I don't know, but I think there's for the whole generation coming up there. Sorry, very echoey here. There's a shift away from spending time watching video, so consuming, say, TV or video or films, to more interactive types of video gaming experiences, or for example, these online, concerts that you go to where it's a concert done by an avatar and so on, which sounds, admittedly to me completely weird. Why would you want to watch that? But millions of people clearly find it really, really engaging and fun. So why not? But yeah, mental health wise, I think you need to balance with time in the real world, and I expect at some point we will try to figure out what's the optimal kind of time with real people versus time with screens.
Yes, I agree. Camille, did you want to add something?
Oh, just to say to everyone that in Korea, of course, esports is an academic discipline. It's taught in schools, right? So perhaps we can learn maybe from that.
What is esports?
Online gaming.
It's those games.
Online gaming. Oh my God.
With national teams. China, Korea. I mean, it is.
The Australians are into it as well. It's a big deal.
Weren't they talking about bringing it into the Olympics at one point?
Yes.
Yeah.
No.
Yes.
Yes.
And it's a popular college major in the United States now.
Right.
Oh my goodness.
And it's a spectator sport, not only something where you play yourself. So that's one of the reasons for the Olympics discussion. So pre-COVID, there would be large physical events where you would have the sports gamers, up on a stage playing the games with what they were doing displayed on a big monitor overhead, and big crowds of people there to watch in person.
Yeah.
And the audiences for some of these events are larger than any sporting event.
I just don't know what to say.
Whole new world, Helen.
Fascinating.
I'm conscious
Thank
of
you.
time, and I don't want to impose on our speakers for much longer. So unless there are some burning questions from others, I think I might call an end to our discussion. I have, so first of all, I'd like you to all join me in applauding our speakers. You can turn on your mics if you want to. And thank you very much.
Yeah, that was really interesting.
That was great. Yes, it was all fascinating. So thank you all. For those of you who have not received our emails, I put upcoming WIT events into the chat. So please do join us for another event in the future. You'll also get an email from us tomorrow with a reminder of what all of those are. So we hope to see you all, or many of you, at one of our upcoming events. Thank you all speakers again. That was really great.
Thank you.
And
Thank you. It's been brilliant. Thank you.
good. I'm glad you all enjoyed it too. Yeah, I've learned so much. My head is spinning. So with that, we will wrap it up, and I hope to see many of you again very soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Audrey. Thank you.
Thanks, Audrey.
Thanks a lot,
Thank you very
Bye.
much, Audrey.
Bye.